Welcome, welcome. Hi, my name is Karen Boyes, and welcome to Thrive, where we are passionate about empowering our leaders in education. Whether you are leading a school, a team, or just a classroom, or even just yourself. Our webinars, our book talks, articles, carpools. Oh my gosh, I did a carpool with Steve yesterday. It was so much fun. Are packed with wisdom and practical how-tos. So as I said, I'm Karen Boyes, if you haven't met me, and along with Steve Zonneville, we're excited to introduce to you our author today, which is James Anderson. So hi, James.
Hey, Karen, how are you?
We are excited to be able to chat with you today about your new book. And I'll read for everybody, I'll read James's bio, and then we're going to get right into this. So James is an Australian-based international speaker, author, and educator, and he is deeply committed to enhancing our capacity for effective learning. Where people like Hattie and Mazzano define the role of most effective teachers, what James really looks at is the role of effective learners. And I love this switch, this idea of what do actually great learners really do. In doing so, he raises the status of learning from an act to an art and shows leaders how to help their students succeed in school and thrive in life. And we are all about thriving in Thrive Leadership. So we're going to be chatting about his book, Learnership. And if you've got a copy there, yep, there it is.
There it is.
So welcome, James.
Thanks, Karen. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's been a while since we've had a chance to talk, so
Yes.
It's good to be chatting again.
It is indeed. Just so our viewers know, James and I have worked extensively with Art Costa and Ben Acallick together, and over many years, at least 25, I would say.
It's all of that, I think, yeah.
All of that. It's scary.
Let's not put a number on it, though, shall we?
Okay, all right. We started when we were 3. That's what we say, James.
Absolutely.
All right, let's dive in. Let's talk about why a growth mindset is the foundational skill to being a skillful learner.
Yeah, look, the growth mindset, in the book, I talk about the growth mindset as being the foundation for learnership. Because fundamentally, the difference between someone with a fixed mindset and a growth mindset is someone with a fixed mindset doesn't get learning. Like someone with a fixed mindset sees the world like this. They say, hey, look at me. What you see, this is what you get. You know, the person standing here today is basically the same person that's going to be standing here in 5 years' time, just older. And when you see yourself like that, you spend your life looking inwards. You ask yourself, who am I? What abilities do I have? And when you discover that, you ask yourself, well, where do I fit in the world? What am I cut out for? Someone with a growth mindset, though, says, hey, this is me today, but I change. My effort pays off. And my effort results in me becoming the person I want or need to be in the future. And when you understand that, when you understand your capacity to change your most basic characteristics, your talents, your abilities, your intelligence, then it gives you the understanding that you're a learner, you create your abilities. And from that point, the sensible question to ask is, how do I get really good at creating those abilities? And that's what learnership's all about. It's about recognizing you can change and then maximizing how you go about achieving that change. Until we set up in our schools an environment that nurtures a growth mindset and helps students develop that growth mindset, we're pushing the proverbial uphill. In the book, I talk about how this idea of fixed and growth doesn't help us. We talk about fixed and growth and tell kids they need to adopt a growth mindset. And the truth is they don't exist. No one has a fixed mindset. No one has a growth mindset. I talk about mindset as a continuum. And our job in schools is to nurture, to nourish, to encourage an increasingly growth-orientated mindset. And I do that by introducing a whole lot of nudges, these little strategies to help us send more growth-orientated messages in our school and home environments. And throughout the book, just remember this, you'll find all these cute little QR codes in there that jump to me talking about these nudges, about 15 or 20 of them through the book, that help you send a more growth-orientated message. for example, you want to give you one or two?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I tell a story in the book about a music teacher of mine who I put a whole lot of work in. I won't spoil the story too much, but he left me with the impression that I just wasn't musical. And he did it by saying, among other things, he had a piece of music he wanted us to play, and he said, I just want to see who can do this. Now, we've all said that, but it was a little test, a measure of if we could. He could have said, I want to see who's learnt enough to be able to do it, but he didn't. He said, who can? It was a measure of an ability we were meant to have or not have. And that little nudge that changes that message from can you do it to have you learnt enough to do it is what I mentioned a minute ago, that learning is about creating your abilities, not discovering them. But very often we send that discovery message. We tell our kids that, you know, this one's my mathematical one, this one's my artistic one, and this one's my other one. And we try to work out, you know, what they are and what abilities they have. And they're like 3. They have no abilities. But we tell them they have something, and we set up these fixed beliefs. And as teachers, we sort of live that upbringing that we had with all these fixed messages, and we spit them back to our kids. And these nudges help change those messages, and not just our messages, our pedagogy and a whole lot of other stuff, to create little movers that nurture that growth mindset. So in a nutshell, that's why mindset's the fundamental basis of learnership, because someone with a fixed mindset doesn't understand learning. They think learning's about discovering. They think school's one long diagnostic. They think they get to year 10 subject selection time and think the subjects select them. Which am I suited to? I can't choose from all of them. I've just got to work out which ones I'm capable of doing. But someone with a growth mindset says, I can choose from all of these. I mightn't be as good at the moment at all of them, but my actions can make me good at any of them.
James, that reminds me of what I teach when I'm working with students around study skills, because they think that only some people, the intelligent ones, can pass exams, right? It's the smart ones, but actually it's about strategy and technique. And if they don't have the strategy and the technique, and that's what you're talking about, right? But you're talking about the mindset around that. And I don't think we could go down a rabbit hole, I think, with this as well. But I know we've got so much to cover. But this idea that so many of our teachers are not willing to step into that, you know, the end of the continuum that they are actually promoting, which is challenging as well.
Well, I don't think it's a question of stepping into it. It's a case of recognizing where you are. Because where we sit, our mindset, I talk about it in the book, as being like your autopilot. You can turn the autopilot off and go, oh, look, effort's a good thing. But when you're back to autopilot, which is 99% of the time, you go, oh, that's too hard for me. And so we've got to, that's why most of the growth mindset strategies in schools failed. They took the moment and said, adopt a growth mindset, have a growth mindset, and didn't address the underlying beliefs. Most of the strategies came from Pinterest. You know, this is fixed, this is growth, do that. And they didn't work. And that's why we needed to shift away from teaching about mindset, you know, this is fixed, this is growth, do that, to teaching for a growth mindset. And that's what I talk about, setting up that environment, that culture that over time nurtures an increasingly growth-orientated mindset. And you can jump on my website and download that continuum and have a look at it yourself.
Thank you, James. We'll find out about your website a little later. So in the book, you outline 6 different levels of learnership, as you call it. Can you share what these are and how do they really impact the achievement of our learners?
All right, so we're going through to 8 o'clock then?
The brief summary of.
Yeah, of course. Look, when I talk about learnership, I talk about it as the skill of learning. And it's probably worth thinking about it for a minute. Like any other area of expertise, you start off with people who can do nothing and you build the skills up. And like any other area of expertise, you can break it down in the way you think about it. When I talk about learnership, I talk about your relationship to challenge, and we're going to talk a bit about that later on, the habits of mind, where you get information from mistakes and feedback, and how you invest your time and energy in the form of effort. And by looking at those 5 different characteristics, those 5 different elements, as I talk about them in the book, we can identify these 6 different levels of learnership. Basically, the bottom level is the ground level, right? It's what I call a non-learner. And a non-learner basically doesn't participate in the learning process at all. They sit back and ignore it. So we'll just leave that as a baseline for a moment. Then we've got what I call a beginning learner. And a beginning learner loves the path of least resistance. They love the easy option. If you give them options A, B, and C, they'll say, got an option D, something easy that I can do. And we all know some of these kids. They might be compliant, but what they're doing is they're getting busy and they're not getting better. The challenges that they take on are all in their comfort zone. And so over time, what we see happening is, one, teachers have to drag them through the curriculum. Like they're there all day, come on, give this a go, have about this. And you turn around and you go, no, go on with your work, please. And so you're exhausted as a teacher. And because the kids aren't taking on those challenges, their progress is slowly dropping further and further behind that 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. The next level up is the performance learners. And these are the learners that love their performance zones. They love, ta-da, look what I can do. They love showing off the things they know they can do well. In the literature, John Hattie talks about it as they live the mini-max principle. They want the maximum performance from the minimum effort. And for teachers, these kids I've always found them a little bit frustrating because they put energy in, they put focus in, but they don't put it in quite the right place. These kids love doing their best, but you don't get better from doing your best. You get better from stretching and challenging yourself to do a little bit better than your best. These kids are in love with their performance zone, and they think doing well means doing it consistently, doing it reliably, doing it perhaps at a perfect standard. Whereas the attitude we try to develop through learnership is to realise that doing your best means increasing, improving, developing, getting better. The next level of learnership is the first level that really sees some growth. And this is what we call the directed learner. And this is the learner schools were designed to teach. These were the learners that do what teachers say. They require the teacher to set the appropriate challenge, to tell them how to fix mistakes, to give them the feedback. And the problem that I describe in the book is that with these learners, we get the learning, right, the learning outcomes, but we don't create learners. The teacher is in control of the learning process. And I tell a story in the book about one senior school teacher who was getting some of the best results in New South Wales for her Year 12 business management class. Now listen to what I just said. I just said a teacher was getting some of the best results in her Year 12 business management class. She wasn't getting any results at all. Her students were getting the results. But in this culture that we have created, where it's all about the teacher, it's all about the teaching strategy, it's all about the pedagogy, the better results, teachers get good results, we give the teacher all the credit. And that's because the teacher is in charge of the learning process. It's not until we give students control and understanding of the learning process by developing them as independent learners that they actually start taking control. They can set their own challenges. These are the people who are goal setters. These are the people who take charge and move forward. But I make a case that that's not good enough. We've talked about wanting independent learners for a long time. But in a world where change is the only constant and uncertainty is the only certainty, I talk about how we need agile learners. And agile learners are the sort of learners who embrace challenges. In the spirit of JFK, don't give me easy things, give me hard things. We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. I had one of the schools I work with in one of our partnership schools in New South Wales, who said they had a student. Now, this student had been told they were gifted. And as a result, they didn't want to take on any challenges. And once you're told you're smart, you don't want to take on challenges, because if you take on the challenge and fail, well, sorry, you're not gifted. Go sit on the other table, please. So this kid was always doing their best, but never pushing themselves. After they worked through this process of understanding their learning zone, teaching them to be better learners, the teacher came up to me and said, this student had approached her and on the way to class and said, Miss, this next class better be hard, because I don't want to waste my time with easy stuff. That's the sort of attitude we want to develop with our kids, a recognition that that challenge is the pathway to growth. And these agile learners cultivate their habits of mind. They don't lean on their strengths, they lean on their weaknesses. As Adam Grant talks about in his new book, he says the problem with always playing to your strengths is it robs you of the opportunity to develop your weaknesses. And an agile learner is the sort of person who goes, well, I don't want these to remain weaknesses. I want to develop them and make them my strengths, and then go back to these and make these stronger. These people design mistakes. They don't make mistakes, they design them to give them the most information. They tailor feedback, and we could have a whole another session on tailoring feedback. And they invest their effort to maximize their growth. That's a very quick outline of those 6 levels. But as I go through, and there's a tool in the book to measure the level of learnership of your students in your school. And what we've found in a lot of schools that are entrenched in this teaching culture, we've got a lot of beginning, performance and directed learners, and a real step off, stopping our students getting into becoming independent and agile learners. And that's because they don't have a relationship with challenge. I think we're going to talk about that in a minute too.
I love 6 steps. Thank you for being succinct and clear around those. There's a great talk in school, though, about learner agency and, about this voice and choice. But I think you think about going beyond that. So where does this fit, and how do you define learner agency?
Yeah, look, learner agency is one of those things that we really want to go down to Hawke's Bay and find a nice comfy chair, little dark corner and a good bottle of wine, and really have a deep conversation about it, because learner agency speaks to some of the most fundamental parts about being human. Like, it's the way we use the term agency in schools. Oh, we've got to give students agency, so we'll give them a little bit of choice and all the rest of it. It really takes away from this is an idea we've been, as humans, trying to understand for centuries. You can go back to the philosophical and theological roots of it, many centuries. And basically it asks the question, do we make a difference? But when I talk to my principals, they tell me that the thing that keeps them up at night is the idea that some of our kids are going out in the world thinking that they don't make a difference. Like, how can they impact anything? And talking about agency demands a really deep, thoughtful response. And there's some great books out there at the moment that speak to the underlying principle behind it around free will. Like, do we actually have free will? Is it a deterministic universe, Laplace's demon, that if you knew all the momentum and position of all the particles, you could just run time forward and backward and work everything out? Or can we actually make a difference? Because this camera I'm looking at, I'm pretty sure makes no choices at all. It's going to sit there. But I feel like I have choice. And it's that idea that is a fundamental part about being human. So when we have this agency conversation, it's really important to recognize that it's not something trivial. It's something really deep and central to the human condition. To define it, it's probably easier to think about what it isn't to start with. Someone who lacks agency in the world feels like the world happens to them. They become the victim of their circumstances. They're powerless in the face of challenge and adversity. How many of you, the people you work with, Karen, have kids that feel a bit like that over COVID? There's nothing I can do about the world. I'm just...
So many. So
Yeah.
many of them just feel completely powerless and everything's happening to them. You're right.
On the other hand, someone who has agency in the world is powerful in the face of challenge and adversity. They are the master of their circumstances, not the victim. And they go out and act on the world. Look, the world still happens, but someone without agency, when the world happens to them, they duck for cover. They say, oh, I can't wait for this to pass. How many people during COVID did that happen to? Just can't wait for things to get back to normal. There's someone with agency, the adversity still comes along, but they go, well, I'm not putting up with that. I'm going to act back and change the world around me. And so when I started looking at this idea of agency, I looked at all the definitions that were out there, and there were a lot. There's a lot of people all around the world, all different agencies, you know, UNESCO and International Baccalaureate and other people, all talking about this idea of agency. And the definitions vary, and some of them are less practical, shall we say, than others. So when I started talking about it and started playing with the ideas, I wanted a definition that schools could work with. And so I define agency like this. I talk about agency as the degree to which an individual is able to take initiative to meaningfully influence their world, particularly in the face of challenges. It has three equally important and interrelated parts: the environment to act, the will to act, and the power to act. Let me unpack it for a second. First off, it's not a case of you've got agency or you don't. All right, it's a case of how much agency do you have in the world. And that leads to the conversation that agency is something you build, not something you have. To take initiative, that's the free will part. That's the ability to make a decision. You know, I mentioned briefly before my music story. Once I believed in year 7 that I wasn't musical. You know, I was being taught that some people were musical, I wasn't. I went out through the rest of my school years believing that all the music programs, the school musical, the instrumental programs in the school, all that sort of stuff, they weren't choices I could make because I wasn't that way. To meaningfully influence the world. So much of what we do in the name of agency is trivial. We tell kids, oh, we're going to give you voice and choice, and I'll unpack that in a minute. But the voice we give them is to say, right, well, do you want to study this or that? Do you want to do your assessment by doing a PowerPoint presentation, an oral presentation, or a poster? And these aren't meaningful things. These don't speak to what it means to be human. And that's why my definition talks about particularly in the face of challenges. Agency is important when things get hard. We already have agency over easy things. And so the question is, how do we gain agency over the hard things? There's a lot to be said about this, and I put together a guide, and you can download this off the website, and Karen will make sure there's a copy of this with the video recording somewhere around here somewhere. We'll make it work.
Down.
Down underneath. But it unpacks those ideas. But this is the crux of it, that we already have agency over easy things. And the problem with our students and this idea of voice and choice, giving students voice and choice, it's a oxymoron. No, it's not. It's a non sequentia. Forgive me for that. It is true to say people with agency have a voice and can make choices. You see people out there with agency in the world and they're saying, I'm not having to do with this, I'm going to do this instead. And then we turn around to our kids and we say, all right, well, here, I'll let you speak and I'll let you make a choice. But if the voice we give them is a voice they already had, except for the fact that we had gagged them, and if the choices we give them are choices they could already have made, except for the fact that we had restricted them, then we've got to ask ourselves, are we giving students the power to act or merely the permission to act? And so I think when we talk about this idea of agency, it's really important that we recognise that agency is not something that we can give students. Agency is a quality that resides within the individual. It's a quality that we build through developing that will to act, that power to act. The will to act is the mindset part. The power to act is the, is the learnership part. The environment to act, in our case, is the classroom. And if we're going to develop agency, we need to create an environment that's rich in challenge. Because as I just said, you cannot give students agency. Agency is an outcome, not a pedagogy. And so many of the strategies in our schools that say they're talking about agency and giving students agency, it's not. It's all happening in the classroom, in the staff room. It's not actually changing the students. So there you go.
I love that, the power or permission to act. That's a really important piece right there, you know, and truly.
If the student doesn't change, then,
Yeah, which is actually why I love teaching at our school, because we actually literally say to the students, what do you want to learn? And we've had kids do things that they never thought they'd be able to. They stretch themselves and they grow, and it's fascinating.
Well, that's interesting, because what they choose is a function of their level of learnership. If you say to a kid, just a random kid, what do you want to learn today? The non-learner will say, nothing. If you're going to give me a choice, I'll just sit here and do nothing. Thanks very much. The beginning learner will say, what's the easiest thing I can do? The performance learner will go, oh, I did a really good assignment last year. Can I do that one again? Because I know I can do that one really well. The directed learner will turn around and say, I don't know, what do you think I should be doing? Tell me, teacher. Because the directed learner comes to school to be taught. They don't come to school expecting to learn. The independent learner will go, yep, I've got a goal, I've got an interest, I want to pursue that. But an agile learner will go, what's the thing around me that's going to give me the most challenge? Because that's the thing that's going to help me grow the most. So just giving the choice doesn't always give us the outcomes we're looking for with our students, because it depends on their degree of skillfulness as a learner. And a lot of the frustrations teachers have, we talk about wanting to set open-ended tasks, the sort of tasks that you've just talked about. Let's build a rich open-ended task and really get messy with it. Well, the entry price for that sort of pedagogy is a reasonably high level of learnership. And a lot of our kids don't have it. And so they're sitting back going, I'll take the easy path, my path of least resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that distinction around that. It comes back to those levels. So let's jump then into the importance of the learning zone, because I think this is part of it as well.
Yeah, look, understanding your learning zone and how it relates to challenge and how you relate to that zone is one of the foundation pieces of building learnership. I'll just talk about it for a second, because most of us have seen kids develop like this. In the beginning, growth is fairly rapid, but you eventually reach this point where progress slows and stops. This is built on the work of Anders Ericsson, the world's expertise expert, the 10,000 hour rule and all that sort of stuff. And it's a perfectly normal part of learning. We all experience it. This stuff down here, he says, there we go, where progress is rapid, this is what we call your comfort zone. And we've used that term before, but a couple of things I want to point out about it is that we often talk about the comfort zone like it's a bad thing. We say, get outside your comfort zone. No, your comfort zone, the way we raise the bar and increase the size of our comfort zone, is actually the reward for spending time up here. And I'll get to this in a second. But our comfort zone is full of things we've done before, things we know how to do, but it's also full of what I call easy things you haven't done yet. Right? The world is full of things you've already got the abilities to do, you just never got around to doing them. But if you ever had to do them, you just go, yeah, I can do that. You might need a little bit of instruction and that sort of thing, but it'll feel like a task. It doesn't stretch you. It doesn't take up all your resources. This level here, just at your peak current performance, this is what we call your performance zone. And your performance zone is a little bit different because your performance zone takes all your concentration, all your focus, all your intention. It's where you do your best. You can multitask down here. Like if you're cooking dinner, watching the news and having a conversation with your child that's not particularly in depth, you can do all those three things at a time. You've got resources to manage that. But when you're doing your best, you're using all your resources. You're engaging your habits of mind to the maximum current standard that you've got. And to come back to that agency conversation, you already have agency over all of this. Everything that's within your current abilities, you've got agency over. And that's why this area down here, I talk about it as being things you can already do and the easy things you haven't done yet. But as I said before, you don't get better by doing your best. You get better by stretching and challenging yourself just beyond your current best into your learning zone. Now, you might have heard this called the zone of proximal development. Have you heard that phrase, Karen?
Absolutely, yes.
It's similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. I call it the learning zone because I've never seen a child proximally develop. But this is where growth happens. And in fact, if I was rewriting the book, I might actually call this the growth zone rather than the learning zone. Because you can learn down here, you learn new things, you get busy down here doing the breadth work, but you get better up here. And it's that relationship with going into your learning zone that becomes so important to developing learnership. Because like I said before, the non-learner doesn't participate. The beginning learner loves it down here. The performance learner loves the safety and confidence of their performance zone. The directed learner goes here and will improve, but only when they're led there. The independent learner goes here when there's a need, when they've got to set their goals and go there for that reason. But the agile learner lives here. They embrace this because they know all the time they invest here helps them grow and grow and grow. And as they grow, their comfort zone gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and their life gets filled with easy things they hadn't done yet. Unfortunately, we don't often tell kids about their learning zone, or when we do, we sort of give it this negative connotation that, we're going to go into our learning zone today. Don't worry, some things are hard. And they're thinking, well, why are we doing the hard things? Because the stuff I did yesterday was the easy stuff. And what we're doing is we're moving kids in and out of their learning zone, but we're not telling them. We're confusing the idea of learning in their comfort and performance zones with abilities they've already got with growth. And so in the book and with the partnership schools that I work with, we spend a lot of time helping students develop a relationship with their learning zone. And I love this quote. Did you have the chance to watch Ted Lasso? Have you seen Ted Lasso?
Oh, I love Ted.
Yeah, he's great. There's a lot of wisdom in there. Brene Brown was consulting on it, so there's a lot of stuff come out of there as well. But obviously Ted is a fictional character. But I love this quote that taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong. Yeah, because challenge is the pathway to growth. Without challenge, there is no growth. And so if kids are habitually avoiding challenges or only going there reluctantly because I have to because the teacher told me to, then they're not going to experience that growth. And so it's interesting at this time of the year while we're making this recording, it's start of the year, end of term one, and I've been to a lot of schools classrooms that set up learning expectations, classroom expectations. And it's interesting to look at them because when I look at them, they're nearly always behavioural expectations. Come to class on time, have your equipment, finish your homework, listen to the teacher, follow instructions, all that sort of stuff, which is good. Like there's nothing wrong with that stuff. But it's not actually about learning. One of the things that we do in the schools we work with, we get kids to understand, this sort of stuff. When we talk about learning expectations, that to learn, to grow, Expect to be challenged. Expect not to immediately know the answer. Expect to feel a little bit uncomfortable, to struggle, to not... Some of my classrooms, when they're in the learning zone, not when they're in their comfort zone or performance zone, but when they're in their learning zone, they're setting mistakes quotas. So if you don't make between 5 and 20 mistakes in the next hour, it's not hard enough for you. Kids are going, oh no, I don't want to make mistakes. Expect learning to involve struggle. Effort is the cost of growth. The agile learner understands that cost, can count that cost and invests it. You know, again, Adam Grant, because you're going to ask me about who's inspiring me later on. Guess who is doing that? Adam Grant talks about how we need to become creatures of discomfort. And I think that's beautiful. When I read it, I just went, oh, you bastard. That should have been in my book. And then I thought, all right, next book, I'm going to come up with some phrases like that. But I think this is important, this next part. Like we sort of tell kids this first part, you know, learning's going to be hard, you've got to work at it. But we don't tell them the reward. We don't tell them what they get for all that hard work. All of that is normal. Expect those feelings to pass. You know, someone with a fixed mindset thinks if this thing is hard I'm doing now, then this next level is going to be harder. And this level is going to be really hard. And that level is going to be impossible. And they say, well, stuff it, I'm not doing that. And teachers make it worse. Teachers give that impression sometimes when they tell kids, you know, if you think this is hard, you just wait until next year. It gets really hard. And the kid's 8 years old and they're going, oh my God. No, that feeling of struggle passes. It's hard until you make it easy. Then it's hard until you make it easy. It doesn't get harder and harder. Expect to make new abilities, to make possible what wasn't possible before. Expect to gain success and mastery. Pause and celebrate your growth. I'm not really interested in the standard any child is at. What I'm interested in is what they did to get there. And that's part of when I talk in the book about shifting this culture of teaching and performance and making it about learning and growth. It changes what we value. It changes what we recognize and celebrate. And then expect to do it all again. And that diagram's straight out of the book. You can grab it out of there too.
Yeah.
That relationship we build, the understanding of our learning zone, the reward we get for it. And like I said before, the agile learner who embraces it, that says, I want to be in there, is the person who is constantly growing, constantly improving. And as they raise the bar, make things possible that weren't possible before, their comfort zone gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And what that does is it future-proofs them. All right, it makes them become what Nicholas Taleb calls anti-fragile. They're people that actually benefit from this uncertain, constantly changing world that's around us. They thrive on that uncertainty and that challenge that's around them because every time they embrace it and they take it up another notch. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we are going to need to finish up very soon, but what are some of the first steps that you recommend for schools, teachers to take to maybe escape that culture of teaching that dominates our education system? And how do we move to this idea of celebrating and focusing on the learning and the growth?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing you need to do is recognise the problem exists. That we have, over the last 10, 15, 20 years of education, focused on teacher practice. It's all been about teacher practice. We all make a difference. It's no longer enough to make a difference. You've got to make the most difference. That strategy's good, but it's got to be above 0.4 all that sort of stuff. That's all good work. Okay, I want teachers to be good teachers, to know what they're doing. But in the book, I talk about a quote from John Holt. I almost forgot his name. John Holt, who said, learning is not the product of teaching. Learning is the product of the activity of learners. And I think that's really important because you can be the best teacher in the world. And if the student doesn't hold up their side of the bargain, no growth happens at all. And we've all experienced that. Like particularly in the last 10 years after we've all been told how important feedback is to give students and how to compose feedback. And we've written some great feedback and gone, oh God, I'm a good teacher. Like, check this feedback out. This is perfect. This is going to make such a difference. And then we give it to a kid who goes, yeah, whatever. And so while we can think of teaching as a skillful act, and we've been building that skill over the decades now, while that's been happening, students have started to sit back and waited to be taught. It's interesting, this whole word learning. We have a career pathway in Victoria here where I am that talks about being a learning expert. And when you look at what these supposed learning experts do, they're not experts in learning at all. They're experts in teaching. And the assumption is that the teaching will result in learning outcomes. And so we've unbalanced this equation. I talk about it in the book as the learning equation, that growth comes from skillful teaching times skillful learning. And so we've got to recognize that if we want the maximum growth out of these kids, take skillful teaching, but we've got to raise the status of learning in the same way as we've raised the status of teaching, from an act to an art. And the analogy I give, and it dates me, Karen, you're much younger than I am, so you probably won't know who Torval and Dean are, yeah?
I don't think that's true, but thanks for the compliment.
Yeah. Torval and Dean, if you don't, for some of the viewers that might not know who they were, famous ice skaters, 1984 Olympics, dominated the ice dancing in the Olympics. And I like to think about what goes on in a classroom like that. That we've got skillful teachers, but to get the best results, it's a partnership. They're not doing the same thing. They're complementing each other. And when we've got skillful teaching and we've got skillful learning, then we have a thing of beauty going on in the classroom. And that's why I talk about raising the status of learning from an act to an art. Because at the moment, we've got kids that are coming to school expecting to be taught. They're passive learners, receivers. And we've got to step that up for the sake of our parents, for the sake of our school culture, but most of all for the sake of our students. Because if our students are going out into that world that is constantly changing and uncertainty is the only certainty, without the ability not just to learn, but to become better learners, then we're setting them up not to have agency in the world. They'll go out into the world and the world will happen to them. And I think that's the real tragedy. There might have been a time when directed learning was enough. Teach the kids what they needed to know and send them out to the world with that knowledge. I don't think that's time. It's not that time anymore.
That was definitely last century. Absolutely. You are so talking my language, James, because I've been teaching students how to learn and the learning art of learning for, gosh, it's now 30 years. And I just get so frustrated. It doesn't feel like it's making a difference, but it is for those learners. But I love that idea of that partnership and that dance between them. Thank you so much. I have a final question, and then we're going to find out where people can get your book from. So at Spectrum and at Thrive Leaders, we're all about lifelong learning. And so my question is, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to that's absolutely inspiring you? I think I know the answer.
Yep.
Wow.
So I ducked off to grab a copy. I should have had it closer. Yeah, no surprise. I've mentioned him a couple of times. This book by Adam Grant. And I think I would actually challenge you on the idea of being lifelong learners, because that whole idea of we need to be lifelong learners and the illiterate of the 21st century will be the people who can't learn and unlearn and all the rest of it, that came from predictions in the 70s. And it meant that we needed to consume more knowledge. So we had to keep learning new things. But the things we could learn were easy things we hadn't done yet. We could keep learning at the same level. And I think what we're talking about, what I've certainly talking about in Learnership, and I think what Adam Grant would share with us, is that it's not just about doing more learning. It's about getting better. It's about the growth. And the way Adam Grant talks about being creatures of discomfort, the way he talks about the same stuff I talk about in Learnership, is beautifully done, particularly the first half of the book that is very, very close to what I talk about. So that's what's inspiring me. And it's very, very well written at that.
It is, absolutely. And Erin will be interested in this. Spoiler alert, might be the book for term 3 book book club. It's definitely high on the list. It's not a term 2 book, but it's definitely high on the list for term 3, and it is a fantastic book. James, thank you so much for your knowledge, for your wisdom, for your book. How can people find the book? Here we go.
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on all the normal channels. The hard copy version. There's also an audio version. I can sit down and tell you about the experience of recording my own audio book, which was a challenge in itself, but people tell me it's come out quite well. My website, of course, is jamesanderson.com.au because I'm an Aussie, and so it's available there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I wish you well in the future, and just keep developing this stuff. I think you're right on the edge of that, taking us into that wonderful place that education needs to go. So thanks, James.
Thanks, Karen. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. Stay there and I'll have a chat with you soon. Look, thank you for everyone who's watching. If you're a member and you're watching the recording, thank you. If you are not a member, I want to let you know that we host monthly webinars, book talks, just like this one. You get a weekly newsletter from Steve. Everyone gets the beginning of the newsletter, but the extended articles are just for our members. Steve does this wonderful carpool where he takes leaders out in the car and does the whole carpool karaoke, not really, but interviews leaders, because some of the best talks happen in the car, don't they? He does that, and he has so much fun, and that is free to all our members. And if you want to find out more, you just need to go to spectrumeducation.com and look up Thrive Leaders, and all the information is there. I do want to let you know that our next webinar in April, though, is with Kate I can't even say her name, Minari, I think. She's Australia's only female Navy helicopter pilot to fly in Afghanistan. And she's going to be talking about resilience under fire. She's got real experience. And I know as leaders, sometimes you feel like that. Everything's coming from all directions. How do you hold your space? How do you hold your values? How do you know what to do when everything is being thrown at you? So again, all the details are at spectrumeducation.com. We'd love to see you there. Members, you will get automatic information as it's complimentary to you. And if you just want to join a session, that is fine too. So thank you so much for joining us again. Thank you to James, and please keep thriving.